I love you so much.
Oh my God, tell me I'm dreaming.
Husband forgets luggage, wife rushed to the airport to give him but got frozen instead. Distinguished viewers, welcome to Luxury True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more amazing real-life luxury stories. Now, let's get into the story. Mara Clifford grew up in a quiet coastal town called Silver Bay, where the ocean breeze and calm streets created a peaceful life. She lived with her parents in a small blue house overlooking the water. Her father, George Clifford, was a retired architect who loved sketching building designs in the kitchen during quiet afternoons. Watching him work inspired Mara's early fascination with creativity and structure. Her mother, Helen Clifford, was a former librarian who filled their home with books and stories. Helen believed knowledge and kindness shaped a person's future, and she encouraged Mara to read, imagine, and dream about the life she wanted. From a young age, Mara showed a strong interest in design and art. She spent hours rearranging furniture in her room, drawing interior layouts, and imagining how spaces could make people feel comfortable and happy. Her parents noticed her talent and always supported her dreams. George would patiently explain architectural ideas, while Helen reminded her that success required both passion and patience. Their home was simple but full of warmth, laughter, and encouragement. Mara grew up believing that love and dedication could build a strong future. As Mara grew older, she carried those lessons with her. She dreamed of becoming a professional interior designer and creating beautiful spaces that reflected people's lives and emotions. She believed in loyalty, honesty, and the idea that love could last forever. In her peaceful hometown, surrounded by supportive parents and quiet sunsets over the ocean, Mara felt certain that life ahead of her would be full of hope and happiness. She had no idea that one day her life would change in ways she never expected. Richard Friedrich grew up in a busy city where life moved quickly and competition was everywhere. And like Mara's quiet upbringing, Richard's childhood was shaped by pressure and ambition. His father worked long hours as a corporate manager and believed his success was the most important achievement in life. From an early age, Richard was taught that failure was unacceptable. His mother, Elaine Friedrich, was elegant and disciplined, always reminding him that reputation and status mattered. Their household valued achievement, recognition, and financial success above everything else. Because of this environment, Richard developed a strong desire to prove himself. He was intelligent and confident, excelling in school and business studies. People often admired his charm and determination, and he quickly learned how to impress others with his ideas and charisma. However, behind that confidence was a constant pressure to succeed and be better than everyone around him. Richard believed that wealth and influence would bring him the respect he always sought. As he entered adulthood, Richard focused completely on building a successful career in business and finance. He dreamed of rising to the top of the corporate world and becoming someone powerful and admired. While others his age enjoyed simple pleasures, Richard spent most of his time planning his future and chasing opportunities. He believed that life was a competition, and he intended to win it. At that time, he had no idea that meeting someone unexpected would soon change the direction of his life. Mara Clifford first met Richard Friedrich on a quiet autumn afternoon in the city where she had recently moved to pursue her career in interior design. After leaving her peaceful hometown of Silver Bay, Mara wanted to experience a larger world and grow professionally. The city was vibrant and busy, filled with tall glass buildings, crowded cafes, and people constantly rushing from one place to another. It was very different from the calm life she had known growing up, but Mara was determined to adapt. On that particular afternoon, she had stopped at a small cafe near her workplace to review some design sketches for a client. The cafe was warm and filled with the aroma of fresh coffee, creating a calm atmosphere despite the noise outside. Richard happened to enter the same cafe that day after finishing a business meeting nearby. Dressed sharply and carrying the confident energy people often associated with him, he ordered coffee and looked around for a seat. The cafe was nearly full, and the only empty chair happened to be across from Mara's table. Politely, he asked if he could sit there, and she agreed with a friendly smile. What began as a simple moment quickly turned into a conversation. Richard noticed the sketches spread across the table and asked about them. Mara explained her work with enthusiasm, describing how interior spaces could influence emotions and comfort. Richard was surprisingly interested, asking thoughtful questions and listening closely. The conversation lasted much longer than either of them expected. Mara found Richard confident and intelligent, while Richard was drawn to Mara's warmth and creativity. She was different from the people he usually met in his competitive business world. There was a sincerity in her voice that felt refreshing. Before leaving the cafe, Richard asked if they could meet again sometime. Mara hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. Neither of them realized that this simple encounter, born from a shared table in a crowded cafe, would eventually lead them into a relationship that would deeply shape both of their lives. After their first meeting at the cafe, Mara Clifford and Richard Friedrich began seeing each other more often. What started as occasional conversations slowly grew into regular meetings. Richard would invite Mara to quiet restaurants after work, and sometimes they would simply walk through the city streets talking about their goals and experiences. Mara spoke passionately about interior design and the dream of creating spaces that felt warm and meaningful. Richard talked about business, investments, and his ambition to build a powerful career. Despite their different backgrounds, their conversations flowed easily, and they enjoyed learning about each other's worlds. Over time, their connection deepened. Richard admired Mara's kindness and creativity, qualities he rarely saw in the competitive circles he worked in. Being around her gave him a sense of calm he wasn't used to. Mara, on the other hand, was impressed by Richard's determination and confidence. She believed his ambition would lead him to great success, and she admired the discipline he showed in pursuing his goals. They began supporting each other's dreams in small but meaningful ways. Mara would listen patiently when Richard spoke about his business plans, while Richard encouraged her to take on larger design projects and believe in her abilities. As weeks turned into months, their relationship naturally grew into love. They spent weekends exploring the city, visiting art galleries, parks, and quiet waterfronts where they could escape the busy streets. Mara introduced Richard to her parents through video calls, and Helen and George quickly liked the young man who seemed devoted to their daughter. For Mara, everything felt right. She believed she had found someone who understood her and shared her hopes for the future. Richard also felt that Mara brought balance into his life. Their relationship seemed strong and full of promise, and both of them began imagining a future they would build together. As their relationship grew stronger, Mara Clifford and Richard Friedrich began to imagine a future together. Their days were filled with long conversations about dreams, careers, and the kind of life they hoped to build. Mara often spoke about creating a home filled with warmth and creativity, a place where family and happiness would always come first. Richard talked about expanding his career, building a successful company, and eventually reaching a level of influence in the business world. Despite their different priorities, they believed their goals could fit together perfectly. Mara admired Richard's drive, while Richard appreciated the stability and kindness Mara brought into his life. After nearly 2 years of being together, Richard decided it was time to take the next step. One evening, he invited Mara to the same cafe where they had first met. The place looked almost exactly the same, warm lights glowing softly and the quiet hum of conversations filling the air. As they sat together, Richard reflected on how that small meeting had changed his life. With a calm but sincere voice, he asked Mara to marry him. The moment was simple but meaningful, and Mara felt overwhelmed with emotion. She said yes without hesitation, believing that their love would carry them through any challenge life might bring. Their wedding took place several months later in a beautiful garden outside the city. Close friends and family gathered to celebrate their union. Helen and George Clifford watched proudly as their daughter walked down the aisle, confident that she had chosen someone who would care for her deeply. Richard's family also attended, impressed by Mara's grace and warmth. The ceremony was filled with laughter, promises, and hopeful expectations. As Mara and Richard exchanged vows, they believed they were beginning a new chapter filled with happiness, partnership, and shared dreams. At that moment, neither of them imagined that the future would test their relationship in ways they could never have predicted. In the first year of their marriage, Mara Clifford and Richard Fredericks settled into what seemed like a comfortable life. They moved into a modern apartment in the city, a place Mara carefully decorated with soft colors, elegant furniture, and warm lighting that made the space feel welcoming. Richard spent most of his days working at his company, while Mara continued building her reputation as an interior designer. At first, their schedules fit together well. Even when Richard returned home late from work, Mara would wait for him so they could share dinner and talk about their day. Those quiet evenings made Mara feel secure, as if they were slowly building the life they had dreamed about. However, as months passed, Richard's career demands began to increase. His company was expanding, and he spent more time chasing business opportunities, attending meetings, and traveling for work. The pressure to succeed grew stronger, and Richard became more focused on achieving recognition and financial success. While Mara tried to support him, she began to notice small changes in his behavior. He was often distracted, checking messages during conversations or leaving home early without much explanation. Sometimes he returned late at night looking exhausted and unwilling to talk about work. Mara told herself that this was simply part of Richard's ambition and that things would settle once his career became more stable. Despite her efforts to stay positive, the distance between them slowly became more noticeable. The warm conversations they once shared grew shorter, replaced by silence or brief exchanges. Richard rarely joined Mara for the weekend walks they once enjoyed, and he often cancelled plans at the last moment because of work commitments. Mara continued trying to keep their home peaceful and supportive, believing that patience and understanding would help their marriage remain strong. Yet deep inside, she began to feel a quiet unease, a feeling she could not fully explain. The life they had promised each other still existed, but something subtle had begun to shift beneath the surface. As Richard Fredericks' responsibilities at work continued to grow, he found himself attending more networking events and business gatherings across the city. These events were filled with investors, entrepreneurs, and professionals looking for new opportunities. Richard believed these connections could help him expand his career and strengthen his reputation in the industry. One evening, he attended a high-profile business reception held in an elegant downtown hotel. The room was filled with conversations about investments, partnerships, and ambitious projects. For Richard, it felt like the perfect environment to push his ambitions further. It was at this event that Richard first met Linda Kenneth. She introduced herself confidently as an independent financial consultant who specialized in connecting investors with promising companies. Linda was poised, stylish, and extremely persuasive. Her ability to speak about finance and business impressed many people in the room. When she began talking with Richard, she seemed genuinely interested in his ideas and the future plans he had for his company. Linda listened carefully as Richard explained his ambitions and the challenges he faced while trying to expand his business. She complimented his vision and suggested that she might know investors who would be interested in supporting his projects. Richard was immediately intrigued by her confidence and connections. Linda appeared to understand the business world perfectly, and her attention made Richard feel recognized in ways he had been craving. Over the next few weeks, they stayed in contact, discussing potential opportunities and meeting occasionally to talk about investments. Linda always presented herself as professional and helpful, carefully building Richard's trust. What Richard did not realize was that behind Linda's polished image was a hidden agenda. She had a reputation for manipulating wealthy or ambitious individuals, slowly gaining their confidence before taking advantage of them. At that moment, however, Richard saw her only as a valuable connection who could help him achieve the success he had been chasing. After their first meeting at the business reception, Linda Kenneth gradually became more involved in Richard Fredericks' professional life. She contacted him frequently, often suggesting new investment opportunities and business strategies that sounded promising. Linda spoke with confidence and authority, presenting herself as someone deeply connected in financial circles. Richard, who had been searching for ways to expand his business quickly, found her ideas extremely appealing. She would invite him to quiet restaurants or private lounges where they could discuss potential deals without distractions. Each meeting made Richard believe that Linda possessed knowledge and connections that could elevate his career to the next level. Linda understood exactly how to maintain Richard's attention. She praised his ambition and repeatedly told him that he had the potential to become one of the most influential businessmen in the city. These compliments fueled Richard's confidence and slowly drew him deeper into her influence. At the same time, Linda carefully encouraged him to keep their meetings discreet. She explained that many investors preferred privacy when discussing financial opportunities. Richard accepted this explanation without suspicion, believing that secrecy was simply part of serious business negotiations. Gradually, he began spending more time communicating with Linda than he did talking with Mara about his work. Meanwhile, Mara started noticing subtle changes in Richard's behavior at home. He was often distracted, responding to messages quickly or stepping into another room to take phone calls. When Mara asked about his new business contacts, Richard gave brief answers and changed the subject. Mara tried not to assume anything negative, reminding herself that Richard was under pressure to succeed. Still, the distance between them continued to grow. While Mara focused on her interior design projects and maintaining their home, Richard became increasingly absorbed in his interactions with Linda. What Mara did not know was that Linda was slowly weaving a web of manipulation, carefully positioning herself to gain Richard's full trust before revealing her true intentions. As weeks passed, Mara Clifford could no longer ignore the strange changes in Richard Friedrich's behavior. The man who once shared every detail of his day had become distant and unusually secretive. Richard spent more time outside the apartment, often saying he had late meetings or business dinners. His phone was always closed to him, and sometimes he stepped onto the balcony or into another room to answer calls quietly. Mara tried to remain calm and supportive, reminding herself that Richard had always been ambitious and hard-working. She believed the pressure of his expanding business might simply be overwhelming him. Despite her efforts to stay positive, small details continued to trouble her. Richard sometimes returned home later than usual, and when he did, he appeared distracted and tired. On several evenings, Mara prepared dinner only to receive a short message saying he would be eating with colleagues instead. She noticed that their conversations had become brief and mechanical, lacking the warmth they once shared. When she asked about his new projects or the people he was working with, Richard answered quickly and then changed the topic. Mara felt a quiet sadness growing inside her, but she avoided confrontation because she didn't want to create conflict in their marriage. Clara Bennett, Mara's close friend and co-worker, eventually noticed that something was bothering her. During a lunch break one afternoon, Clara gently asked Mara if everything at home was all right. Mara hesitated before explaining the situation, describing Richard's long hours and secretive behavior. Clara listened carefully and suggested that sometimes stress could change people temporarily. However, she also advised Mara to trust her instincts and pay attention to the signs around her. Mara appreciated her friend's concern, but she still hoped that everything would return to normal. She believed that love and patience could repair any distance between them, unaware that the truth was slowly moving closer to a moment that would change her life forever. One early morning, Richard Friedrich prepared to leave for an important business trip. The apartment was still quiet, with the soft light of sunrise entering through the windows. Mara Clifford woke up earlier than usual to help him prepare breakfast before his flight. Despite the distance that had grown between them in recent months, she still cared deeply about supporting him. She believed that small gestures of kindness could remind them both of the love they once shared. While Richard hurried through the apartment collecting his documents and checking his phone repeatedly, Mara calmly packed some snacks and coffee for him to take along on the trip. Richard appeared distracted and rushed. He kept glancing at the clock, clearly worried about being late for his flight. His suitcase was already near the door, and his laptop bag rested on the table beside several business documents. Mara noticed that he seemed unusually tense, as if something was weighing heavily on his mind. When she asked if everything was all right, Richard quickly responded that he was simply nervous about an important meeting waiting for him at his destination. Mara nodded and tried not to question him further. She helped him gather his belongings while wishing him a safe journey. After Richard left for the airport, the apartment became silent again. Mara began clearing the breakfast table when she suddenly noticed a small leather travel bag sitting near the sofa. It contained several documents and personal items Richard had clearly intended to take with him. Realizing how important it might be, she quickly called his phone, but he didn't answer. Knowing that he might already be on his way to the airport, Mara decided the best thing to do was to bring the bag to him herself. Without wasting time, she grabbed her coat, picked up the forgotten luggage, and left the apartment, unaware that the trip to the airport would soon lead her to a moment that would shatter everything she believed about her marriage. Mara Clifford hurried through the busy streets with Richard Friedrich's forgotten luggage in her hand. The morning traffic was already building, and the city was alive with people rushing to work, taxis moving quickly, and the distant sound of airplanes crossing the sky. She managed to get a ride to the airport, her mind focused only on reaching Richard before his flight departed. To Mara, this felt like a small act of care, something a supportive wife would naturally do. She believed that helping him would make his stressful morning a little easier. Despite the uneasy feelings that had been growing in her heart over the past weeks, she still held on to hope that their marriage could return to the warmth it once had. When Mara finally arrived at the airport, the large terminal was filled with travelers pulling suitcases and checking departure screens. She moved quickly through the crowd, holding the small leather bag tightly. After asking a staff member about Richard's flight gate, she followed the direction toward the waiting area. Her heart beat faster, partly from rushing and partly from the nervous urgency of finding him before it was too late. As she approached the gate, she scanned the area carefully, looking for Richard among the passengers. For a brief moment, she felt relieved when she spotted him standing near a window at the far side of the waiting area. But the relief lasted only a second. Standing beside Richard was Linda Kenneth. Mara slowed her steps, confused by the unexpected sight. Before she could fully process what she was seeing, Linda leaned closer to Richard, and the two of them shared a quiet, intimate kiss. The moment felt unreal, as if time had suddenly stopped. Mara stood frozen a short distance away, unable to move or speak. The sounds of the busy airport faded around her as the truth settled heavily in her chest. The man she had rushed there to help, the husband she believed she understood, was standing with another woman in a moment of affection that left no room for doubt. Without a word, Mara remained still, her world silently breaking apart. For several long seconds, Mara Clifford remained completely still, the forgotten luggage hanging loosely from her hand. The busy airport continued moving around her, people rushing to gates, announcements echoing through the large terminal, luggage wheels rolling across the polished floor, but none of it seemed real anymore. Her attention was fixed on the scene before her. Richard Friedrich and Linda Kenneth stood close together, speaking softly and smiling in a way that Mara had not seen from Richard in months. The quiet affection between them made the truth painfully clear. There was no misunderstanding, no explanation that could change what she had just witnessed. A wave of emotions passed through Mara all at once, shock, disbelief, sadness, and a deep quiet pain that seemed to settle heavily inside her chest. She had imagined many possible reasons for Richard's recent distance: work pressure, stress, exhaustion. But this was something she had never truly allowed herself to believe. For a moment she thought about walking toward them, about asking the questions that were already forming in her mind. Yet the words never came. Instead, Mara simply stood there, watching silently as the man she loved shared a private moment with someone else. Slowly, Mara placed the forgotten luggage on a nearby seat without drawing attention. She turned away before Richard could notice her. Each step she took felt heavy, but she continued walking through the terminal, leaving the scene behind without saying a single word. The airport doors opened to the cool morning air as she stepped outside, her thoughts quiet and distant. In that silent walk away from the airport, Mara made a decision she never expected to face. Without confrontation, without anger, she understood that the life she had built with Richard was already over. What remained now was the difficult part of letting go and beginning again. After Mara Clifford quietly left the airport, she returned to the apartment she once shared with Richard Friedrich. The home that had once felt warm and comforting now felt strangely unfamiliar. Every object in the room reminded her of the life they had built together, photos from their wedding, furniture she had carefully chosen, and the small decorations that reflected her love for design. Mara sat silently for a long time, trying to steady her thoughts. The image she had witnessed at the airport replayed in her mind again and again. Although the moment had been brief, it had answered every question she had quietly carried for weeks. Instead of confronting Richard immediately, Mara chose to act with calm clarity. Over the next few days, she began making practical decisions about her future. She spoke with a lawyer and quietly prepared the necessary steps for a divorce. The process was painful, but Mara believed it was the only path forward. When Richard eventually returned from his trip, he was surprised to find her distant and composed. Mara did not mention the airport scene or accuse him of anything. Instead, she calmly explained that she believed their marriage had come to an end. Richard was shocked by her sudden decision, unable to understand how she had reached that conclusion so quickly. While Mara moved forward with determination, Richard's life took a very different direction. His connection with Linda Kenneth grew stronger after the trip. Linda continued presenting new financial opportunities, convincing Richard that certain investments could dramatically expand his business. Trusting her judgment, Richard began placing large amounts of money into projects she recommended. He believed that Linda was helping him move closer to the success he had always desired. What he did not realize was that Linda had carefully planned every step. Behind her confident smile and persuasive words, she was quietly preparing to take advantage of the trust Richard had placed in her. For several months after Mara Clifford left his life, Richard Friedrich became even more involved with Linda Kenneth. She presented herself as both a business partner and someone who understood his ambitions. Linda constantly spoke about investment opportunities, claiming she had connections with international investors and private financial groups. Richard, who was already chasing rapid success, believed he had finally found someone who could help him achieve the influence he had always wanted. He trusted her advice and began transferring large amounts of money into business projects she claimed would produce massive returns. Linda handled everything with calculated confidence. She organized meetings in private offices and upscale restaurants, presenting documents and financial plans that appeared convincing. Richard rarely questioned her methods, because every explanation she gave seemed logical and professional. She often reassured him that their investments were progressing well and that the profits would soon appear. Over time, Richard invested more and more of his savings, even borrowing additional funds to expand the projects Linda described. To him, the future seemed close. Success, wealth, and recognition were only a matter of time. Then, one morning, everything suddenly changed. Richard arrived at the office Linda had been using for their meetings, only to find it empty. The staff who once worked there were gone, and the company name displayed on the door had been removed. Confused, he tried calling Linda repeatedly, but her phone number was no longer active. Emails bounced back unanswered, and every contact he had for her disappeared. Slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. Linda Kenneth had vanished completely, taking the money he had trusted her with. In a single moment, Richard realized that the person he believed was helping him succeed had actually been deceiving him all along. The financial damage was enormous, and the consequences of his choices were only beginning to unfold. While Richard Friedrich struggled with the consequences of Linda Kenneth's disappearance, Mara Clifford had quietly begun rebuilding her life. The divorce process had been difficult, but Mara faced it with calm determination. She moved out of the apartment she once shared with Richard and rented a smaller place in a quiet neighborhood closer to her workplace. The new apartment was simple, but Mara carefully decorated it with soft colors, plants, and thoughtful design touches that made the space feel peaceful again. Creating that environment helped her slowly regain a sense of stability after the emotional shock she had experienced. Mara focused most of her energy on her interior design career. She began taking on more independent projects, working with clients who appreciated her creativity and attention to detail. Her designs were known for blending elegance with warmth, creating spaces that felt both beautiful and comfortable. Word about her work slowly spread through recommendations from satisfied clients. Clara Bennett, her close friend and co-worker, continued supporting her throughout this period. Clara often reminded Mara that difficult experiences could lead to stronger opportunities in the future. With time, Mara started believing that her life could move forward in ways she had never previously imagined. As months passed, Mara became stronger and more confident in her independence. The pain of betrayal did not disappear completely, but it no longer controlled her thoughts every day. Instead, she focused on personal growth and the possibilities ahead. She reconnected more often with her parents, Helen and George Clifford, who were proud of her resilience. For the first time since the end of her marriage, Mara felt a quiet sense of freedom. She no longer measured her future through someone else's ambitions. Unknown to her, this new chapter of independence would soon lead her to cross paths with someone whose presence would change her life once again. Several months into her new life, Mara Clifford received an opportunity that would introduce her to a completely different world. A well-known architectural firm in the city contacted her after seeing several of her recent interior design projects. They were working on the renovation of a large luxury property owned by a private client and needed a designer capable of creating a warm, sophisticated interior. Mara was surprised by the scale of the project, but she accepted the opportunity with quiet determination. She knew that taking on larger assignments could help her grow professionally and strengthen her reputation. The property turned out to be far more impressive than she expected. It was a massive modern estate located on the edge of the city, surrounded by tall trees and overlooking a peaceful lake. The architecture was striking: clean lines, large windows, and wide open spaces that allowed natural light to fill the rooms. As Mara walked through the property during the initial inspection, she began imagining how the interiors could transform the place into a welcoming home. While reviewing her notes and sketches in the main hall, she was approached by a calm and well-dressed man who introduced himself as Daniel Theodore. Daniel Theodore was the owner of the property and the man responsible for hiring the architectural firm. Known in business circles as a billionaire entrepreneur, Daniel had built his reputation through innovative technology investments and strategic leadership. Despite his success, his demeanor was calm and respectful rather than arrogant. During the conversation, Daniel listened attentively as Mara explained her design ideas and how she envisioned shaping the spaces within the home. He seemed impressed by her thoughtful approach and genuine passion for her work. For Mara, the meeting felt like another step forward in rebuilding her life. She saw Daniel only as a professional client at that moment, unaware that their paths would soon become much more closely connected. After their first meeting at the lakeside estate, Mara Clifford began working closely with Daniel Theodore on the renovation project. Over the following weeks, she visited the property frequently to study the rooms, measure spaces, and carefully plan each design detail. The project required creativity and precision, and Mara approached it with the same passion that had always guided her work. Daniel occasionally visited the estate during these planning sessions, not to control the process but to observe the progress and understand her ideas. Unlike many wealthy clients who demanded constant changes, Daniel respected Mara's professional judgment and trusted her vision. During these visits, the conversations gradually became more personal. Daniel learned about Mara's design journey and the quiet coastal town where she had grown up. Mara, in turn, noticed that despite Daniel's immense wealth and influence, he carried himself with humility and thoughtfulness. He spoke about building his business through patience and long-term planning rather than chasing quick success. Daniel had always valued integrity and careful decision-making, qualities that had shaped his career and reputation. Mara found his calm perspective refreshing, especially after the difficult experiences she had gone through in the past. As time passed, a natural sense of trust began forming between them. Daniel admired Mara's resilience and independence, while Mara appreciated his steady and respectful nature. Their interactions remained professional, but there was a quiet understanding developing beneath their conversations. Mara had once believed it would be difficult to trust someone again after the pain of betrayal. Yet Daniel's consistent honesty and patience slowly softened those fears. Neither of them rushed the connection, but both began to sense that something meaningful might be quietly growing between them. While Mara Clifford's life was slowly moving towards stability, Richard Friedrich was facing the consequences of his past decisions. After Linda Kenneth disappeared with his money, his financial situation became increasingly difficult. The investments he had trusted her with were gone, leaving him with heavy debts and damaged business relationships. Several partners who once believed in his projects began distancing themselves, unwilling to be involved in the fallout from the failed investments. Richard spent many sleepless nights reviewing documents, trying to understand how he had allowed himself to be manipulated so easily. During this difficult period, Richard often found himself thinking about the life he once had with Mara. The quiet apartment, the calm dinners they shared, and the support she had always given him now seemed far more valuable than the ambitions he had been chasing. For the first time, he began to fully understand the cost of the choices he had made. Mara had offered loyalty, patience, and stability, yet he had ignored those things while pursuing quick success and trusting someone who had ultimately deceived him. The realization brought a deep sense of regret that he could not easily escape. Eventually, Richard decided he needed to speak with Mara again. He believed that if he could explain what had happened, perhaps he could repair at least some part of the relationship they once shared. Gathering the courage to reach out, he contacted her after many months of silence. When Mara received the message, she read it calmly but without the emotional reaction Richard might have expected. Her life had already begun moving in a new direction, and the painful chapter she had left behind no longer held the same power over her future. Richard's regret had arrived too late to change the path Mara had chosen. By the time Richard Friedrich attempted to reconnect with Mara Clifford, her life had already begun to take a new and hopeful direction. The renovation project at Daniel Theodore's lakeside estate had progressed beautifully. Mara's designs transformed the large spaces into warm, elegant rooms filled with natural light and thoughtful detail. Daniel was deeply impressed not only by her creativity, but also by the care she placed into every decision. Each time he visited the property, he noticed how the house slowly began to feel more like a real home rather than just an impressive building. During this time, Daniel and Mara spent many hours discussing design plans, walking through the estate, and reviewing ideas for the final touches. Their conversations became more relaxed and personal, often extending beyond the work itself. Daniel admired Mara's strength and the calm way she approached life after her difficult experiences. Mara, in turn, respected Daniel's thoughtful nature and the quiet confidence he carried despite his enormous success. Their connection grew naturally, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than pressure or expectations. One evening, after the final stage of the renovation was complete, Daniel invited Mara to walk with him along the quiet lake behind the estate. The setting sun reflected across the water, creating a peaceful atmosphere. During that quiet moment, Daniel spoke honestly about the admiration he had developed for her over the past months. He told her that her strength, kindness, and creativity had deeply impressed him. With sincere calmness, he expressed his feelings and asked if she would consider building a future with him. Mara listened carefully, her heart steady but hopeful. For the first time in a long while, she felt certain that the future ahead could truly hold something beautiful. Mara Clifford took time to reflect carefully on the future Daniel Theodore had asked her to consider. Her life had changed so much over the past years that she no longer made decisions quickly or based only on emotion. The experiences she had endured taught her the importance of patience and clarity. Daniel understood this and never rushed her answer. Instead, he continued treating her with the same respect and sincerity that had slowly built the trust between them. Their conversations remained calm and thoughtful, allowing Mara to see clearly the kind of man Daniel truly was. Over time, Mara realized that what she felt with Daniel was very different from what she had experienced before. Their connection was built on honesty, stability, and mutual respect. Daniel never tried to control her life or overshadow her independence. He admired her career, supported her ambitions, and valued her opinions in every decision they discussed. Slowly, Mara allowed herself to believe that love could exist again in a healthy and balanced way. When Daniel eventually asked her once more if she would share her future with him, Mara answered with quiet confidence and acceptance. Their wedding was held months later in a peaceful garden overlooking the same lake where they had often walked together. Close friends, family members, and a few trusted colleagues gathered to celebrate the new chapter in their lives. Helen and George Clifford watched proudly as their daughter stood beside Daniel, knowing she had found someone who truly respected her. For Mara, the journey had been long and painful, but it had also led her to strength and clarity. The heartbreak she once experienced no longer defined her life. Instead, she stepped forward into a future filled with calm happiness, proving that even after deep loss, new beginnings can still lead to something meaningful and beautiful. And that brings us to the end of today's story. The world of luxury often hides stories deeper than what meets the eye. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories on luxury jewel stories. Until our next story, take care and stay tuned for more.